warm welcome to Rahul Dedhia from Godrej. The topic is on merits and demerits of development management model. It's a discussion on the implementation and execution. A short introduction of Rahul. He is the Chief Business Development Officer of Godrej Properties and Senior Business Leader with an experience of 14 years. Rahul joined Godrej in 2009, handling Mumbai, and was a zonal BD head, and then was promoted to Pan India Business Development Head in 2020. Rahul, you've seen the entire beginning of the development managed model, right from the conceptualization to eventually Godrej deciding not to proceed with that particular model, and in fact having a change of strategy. So we'll be discussing that over the next few minutes in a chat, which is more in a form of a question answer. Warm welcome to you, Rahul. We have more than 570 live participants listening to you, plus it's a session which we are also recording. Can you explain the development management model concept? So there are a lot of developers who are willing to explore this. So a quick thoughts of yours on the model.
Thanks, Rahul. I think, am I audible first and foremost?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting, and just for everyone's benefit, I think Harshul is a dear friend, and on his insistence, I could not say no. So it's absolute pleasure to be here. Let's just dive into the agenda. So you're right. At Godrej Properties, I was fortunate enough to be part of the team to have pioneered the DM model. I think we've started doing the DM model pre-RERA as well. I think the value proposition of a DM model was beneficial on both sides. To a developer as well as to the landowner. I think from a developer perspective, if I have to look at it, if there is paucity of capital, there is limited capital, and if you want to grow exponentially, I think it's a great model. It's essentially a model where you are encashing your brand. From a landowner perspective, also there are various benefits which one may see, which would be that if he's looking at a very bullish market and he wants to see a higher upside, then this is the right model for him. If he wants to avoid upfront taxation, by virtue of not transferring assets, I think that's a great model. So there are various reasons why this model was a strategic and a synergistic fit, both for a developer and a landowner. And this is probably the macro level statement and how we went about started to create a DM model, and then we operationalized it. There were of course learnings on the way. Like you've said in multiple forums, then Demon came, RERA came, GST came, so there were workarounds through it. But as it stands today now, in 2017-18, I think we took a call to do away with our DM model, and we'll touch upon that a little later as well. But I think this sufficiently answers your question of why a DM model is beneficial both to a landowner and to a developer as well.
From someone who is new to this entire jargon, and someone because we have audience from various backgrounds coming and joining us, very simplistically, could you explain to someone what is the concept of development management model, and some key nuance difference as compared to the other traditional models where you just buy the land, or where you just partner in giving some area to the landlord?
Right. No, so a DM model is essentially pre-RERA was a model where it was a service contract. That's the fundamental difference. A DM was a service provider, basically a vendor to a company, if I may use it, versus what a JDA or JV or an outright was. You were a joint venture partner. Basically, you had rights in the project, you had rights in the property, you had rights in the title, and there were obligations carved out on both sides. In a DM, essentially, you are a service provider. That's the fundamental difference. Like I said, how do you operationalize it is something which will come to it later on in this agenda. But that was the fundamental difference. We work for a percentage of a top line or a percentage of a fee in a DM, which is capped, versus a JDA or a JV, or actually having a share of profit or a share of revenue, or in outright you're paying for the land upfront. So I think risk and reward in all different models is very, very different. from a DM to a JV to a JDA to an outright. But yeah, essentially the macro difference is, you were a service contractor in a DM, and in the other models you were not.
I think extremely interesting, because this was probably for the first time where services of a developer as a professional was acknowledged. Otherwise, a developer was always looked upon as a businessman, as an entrepreneur who's taking capital risk and getting rewarded for that. But a clear earmarking of developer as a professional was something which this model did, and rightly became successful at one point. What are the key aspects to your mind for successful execution and implementation of DM? Because there have been DMs which have gone wrong also, in terms of the match of intent thought process does not go further down into the project. So what do you think, right from the drawing board, what should be those key points for successful execution and implementation?
Right. So Harshul, there is absolutely no real right answer to this. I think, if I have to break it into two buckets, first, it should be your DNAs and your philosophy should match. I think, a DM is a little bit more of a loser relationship compared to any other model with a JV or a JDA. So first, you should have the right partner. I think that's first and foremost, of sound background, sound repute, and, thinking and DNA matches the way your organization DNA is. I think that's the qualitative aspect, and I think everyone is the best judge of that themselves. If I have to go to some of the other aspects, I think first and foremost, for a successful implementation of DM, I think you need to have proper cash flow management, which is like in the case of any other model, but more so in DM. You should definitely have financial closure, cash flow management. Expectations should be rationalized upfront. I've seen a lot of DMs going wrong because expectations were promised versus what was delivered was poles apart. I think that's also a recipe for kind of disaster. I think basic hygienic things like financial closure, cash flow management, realistic assumptions on your business plan, I think these are recipes which you can build in to safeguard your DM model. But I think on the qualitative side, I think you would want the right partner who's of sound repute, who's also understands the risk associated with any kind of development, right? It's a very cyclical business, and our industry, as everyone knows, is first to get affected in any kind of macro environmental changes. So, anyone who understands what are the risks associated, I would say that would be the criteria in my mind, at least, from a successful implementation of a DM project.
Actually, that's a great point, because one always thinks only of the upsides as a promoter entering into development management. And that brings me to the question around RERA. So, initially it was perceived that as a development manager, one is not a promoter under RERA, hence not really liable, responsible, with the liabilities saddled to a promoter. What's the current position of a development manager under RERA, and what really brings the responsibility or the risk to the developer, being a development manager? So more light on RERA view of the DM.
Yeah, so the current position, Harshul, is that DM is a co-promoter under RERA. You are having the same liabilities as any other co-promoter under RERA. So whether you're in a JV model or a JDA model or any kind of other model, the liabilities which will flow under any other model will also flow to you under a DM. Pre-RERA, you were a service provider. You were insulated on some of the liabilities. Post-RERA, you are completely treated as a co-developer. Of course, inter se in agreements, you can understand that if the liability does flow on the development company, who's going to be, for taking that liability. But eventually, that's an inter se arrangement. Under RERA, you're a co-developer and you're liable as in any other model. That's the arrangement today under RERA. So that's very, very clear.
Absolutely. So I think with the liability and the responsibility and scope being equal to a promoter, it brings to an aspect. Finance is essentially a lifeblood of any project, and funding, institutional fundraising is one of the key aspects. So from a title perspective, how open in your experience are financial institutions to fund a development management model? And what is the structure they look at in terms of guarantors, borrowers? Because here essentially you are a service provider. So from that perspective, what has been your experience with financial institutions?
Great question, Harshul. I think principles of funding remain the same. Start off the question, I think lenders are primarily okay to fund DM models. They were readily available. Then we went through an entire phase where funding had dried up a little bit, but now again I'm seeing that coming back. I think funding principles remain the same. First and foremost, they will look at the quality of the asset. Whether it's a freehold asset, what's the underlying value of the asset, if it's a leasehold or is it SRA. I think that principle is sound. Like you rightly said, funding under a DM model is the responsibility of an owner. But I think in most cases, owners probably bringing land and some amount of capital, and the rest is secured to lenders. So I think they will look at an underlying asset, then they will look for other collaterals. They will look for guarantees. Of course, any lender would want a sound brand to be a DM on the other side, and they would also want the DM to kind of give a backstop guarantee, whether it's a corporate guarantee or otherwise, which at least in Godrej properties we never do. But I think from a lender perspective, that's their ask. And I've seen funding readily available, and we've done several DM models. We've raised finance. I think the landowners have been successfully be able to raise finance. And like I said, it depends on the quality of the asset more so than anything else. Of course, as a backstop mechanism, we will always take a right that, if everything goes wrong, at least Godrej Properties would then introduce capital, at whatever rate of interest, and then, as a short-term bridge loan or whatever is required to complete the project. So that's the way we execute our DM models. But from a lender perspective, I think they are open. I don't see that as a challenge, at least in today's environment.
I think that's very critical. So technically, from raising finance perspective, you are as good as a borrower, in the entire structure perspective. So though not technically termed as a borrower, but being a guarantor, you are typically over there. From your experience, how are home buyers or investors, perceiving projects where, there is a DM model? So are they feeling safe, secure, if they get into this, or is there hesitancy, showcasing that a development management model provider can any which ways be terminated? So then what really happens to the fate of the project? So what has been your experience around home buyers and investors?
Right. Okay. So I think first and foremost, the headline number is I think they are receptive to the DM model. I don't see sales as a major challenge under a DM model. Of course, customers are very, very educated today, and they would want to know more. Are you there, Harshul? Yeah, sorry. So I think customers are very, very educated. They will ask questions. We have to explain to them what the DM model is and how does it work. But I don't think sales are a challenge or compared to different models. I think one interesting thing which you really pointed out is the terminability aspect of a DM. I think, there are certain safeguards and protections, at least which we take to ensure that, when we are not under breach of our obligations, that termination is not an event which, is possible from a landowner point of view. So there are structures which we've evolved, which is, while the macro DM is in place, we ensure that the terminability is not unilaterally possible, as long as Godrej Properties is not in breach of its obligations. So I think that protection is there. There is underlying protection of the brand and, everything that comes with it. So there is enough safeguard. Of course, RERA is there now. So, RERA has also brought in a lot of confidence to the home buyers. But I don't think that's too much of a challenge. It's for, actually I would think the onus is on us developers to, be able to successfully implement as a community many DM models to showcase that this model works to the customers. And then it's just like any other model, whether it's a JV or a JDA. I think, we are, at the evolution of a DM model, and, while JV and JDs have been historically been going on, so they're more, customers are more receptive to that. But I think, once we, as a community, we are able to do many more projects in DM, I think it will be readily accepted as well, more so than it is, but I don't see it as a challenge.
So one fact always intrigues me. Godrej actually conceptualized DM model. Gave it to the industry, the whole concept. Everyone started picking onto it, and Godrej really stopped doing DM. So what was the thought process over there, and why the change of call or strategy around DM?
That's a great question, Archul. And like I said, take a lot of pride in being part of the journey where we did the DM model, we pioneered the profit share model. But just for everyone's perspective, let me just explain why we moved from a DM model to now doing most of our deals as an outright purchase. I think this is one of our philosophical change. It's nothing to do from a customer or a landowner point of view. Earlier, we were wanting to grow market share. We were a capital light company. We had limited capital. We wanted to put that into growth. So, with limited capital, we didn't want to kind of just do a few projects. We wanted to do a lot of projects. So, DMs or low deposit profit shares or low deposit JDAs made a lot of sense for us. Now the push, since the last 4-5 years has been on the bottom line as well. So, and capital is now freely available to Godrej Properties. We've done a couple of QIPs, of course, we have, being able to borrow at, historically low cost. So the thinking is for the same project, if I just use an example, if 100 crores is the revenue of a project, Harshul, are you there? Maybe.
Yes, absolutely.
If I use the same project as an example, and let's assume 100 crores is the revenue of a project. Under a DM, I charge a DM fee of anywhere between 11 or 12% as a percentage of top line. Now, that's the way we look at it. So I would earn anywhere between 11 to 12 crores. From DM, if you go into a JV or a JDA, that number goes to 15 or 16% or 17%, depending on whether it's a low deposit or a high deposit kind of deal. It can go anywhere between 15, 16, 17%. So, and in an outright, that number goes to north of 20 or 25% for the same project. So by selling 100 crores of inventory in a DM, I can either earn 12 crores or I can either earn 25 crores. Now, from the way we look at it in Godrej Properties, I think we are brand agnostic. I think financial risk aside, when our brand gets associated with the project, I think that's most paramount to us, right? We will do anything and everything to make sure that the project is completed. And capital is now freely available to us. So just by virtue of introducing capital from a DM, I can take it to outright and double my profit is the reason why we've shifted gears, because the risk for us remain the same. Our brand risk is much higher compared to any kind of financial risk. So under a DM or an outright or a JDA, we are agnostic as long as a brand is attached to the project. Then we said, why not play the high risk and high return game? For the same amount of work done, we are getting a better push on the bottom line. And that's why we've moved strategy into a higher capital deployment model or an outright model, because there is a tremendous focus on the bottom line. So that's the reason why.
Great. So I think that clears, the air around DM as a model perspective was changed, in terms of strategy only. It was a strategy change and not really, there was a conceptual flaw. So those doing DMs can continue doing the same with reasonable precautions and evaluating it fairly. To your mind, there are a lot of these delayed and stalled projects which are there, saddled with lenders where there are a lot of NPA issues and, resolution for that. Most of the lenders have DM as a solution which is widely acceptable for an incoming developer. Any thoughts that you have around this, that, is this a proper way of, sort of reviving a stalled project, especially when there are multi-stakeholders which have already got involved? So, there's a lender, there's a borrower who's defaulted, there are buyers, allottees, etc. So what's your thought on that?
I think, Archul, this is a very case-to-case specific question. Every case is unique. I think, there is not a master solution for any kind of stalled projects. And like I said, you have to evaluate the risk of each project at the asset level. But it can be a solution. But in my mind, if I have to generalize an answer, probably I think most projects are stuck because of financial mismanagement. or for want of introduction of capital, which if the lender is not willing, a DM partner may not be able to get. So, not naturally synergistic for a DM. Of course, if there is inventory which is readily available to be sold, but the developer is not able to sell it, then yes. But then, it has to be counterbalanced and looked at with different risks, which are with a project, like you rightly said, customers, litigations, lenders, where the asset is stuck in. So I don't really have an answer for that on a macro level. From a case-to-case basis level, we will have to look at it individually.
This brings me to an aspect around taxation. GST has been a major issues, especially, when we are doing these JDAs, JVs sort of transaction. To an extent, at times GST liability equals to the margins that we make. So it's become a key consideration and a decisive factor in terms of structuring the transaction with the landowner or a developer partner. What is the GST liability or a taxation liability from a DM perspective, or is this relatively a much better option in terms of taxation structuring? What are your thoughts on that?
No, so of course it is treated as any other service. DM fee will attract GST of 18%. That's the answer. But again, like our industry is full of mavericks, people have innovated models. So, they've calculated what could possibly be a DM fee and come up with very innovative structures to say that, this is the DM fee, but we'll take it as profit. And from a cash flow point of view, they pay it out as advance share of profit. And, all kinds of structures are there. But from a basic right answer, DM fee is a service, it will attract GST of 18%. Of course, input-output credit has now been disallowed in real estate since a while. So this is obviously a cost which has to be incurred at the project or the asset or the SPV level. There is no doing away with it in a typical DM model.
So I think that brings me more or less to the last question, which is around what would be your advice to developers when they are evaluating various models, and especially when it comes to DM. In your personal opinion, what should be the guiding bar around taking up DM or not taking up DM as a model?
No, like I said, opportunistically used and rightly used, DM is a great model, especially when there is scarcity of capital, or if you are in the business of encashing a brand. I think it's a great model. You can have unlimited potential, unlimited reach, and if you're able to have the wherewithal to execute it, I think it's great. The only thing is, it's not as watertight a model as compared to some of the other models. So, like I touched upon other factors that, you have to weigh the risk and reward. You have to weigh the counterpart as well. As long as you're confident, I think, there is reasonable upside both for the landowner and for a developer as well. But, there is also a little bit of recipe that things can go, bad in case, there is expectation mismanagement, or there is not sufficient financial closure, or the industry sees a downturn. So I think my advice would be to selectively use it. It's a great model for growth, and it can bring a unique value proposition at the table, both from a landowner and developer perspective. So I think use it selectively, and both can reap the rewards.
Super. And I think I've just looked at the comments, extremely encouraging. One of the question that was there was, what is a typical fee that a development manager charges in a DM model? Rahul?
I touched upon that, but yeah, again, it's from a brand to brand. It differs from brand to brand. At Godrej Properties, we typically operate between the 11 and 12% of the top line range. Of course, as any other vendor takes a mobilization advance, we calculate the entire DM fee, which would come to us. For example, my entire DM potential in a project is, say, about 50 crores. We expect 10 crores, 10% of the total DM potential to come to us as a upfront deposit. So that's the DM model. I've seen people working in single digits as well. I've seen people working at various fees. I think it's what the market is willing to pay you, Harshal.
Great. Thanks a lot, Rahul, for that chat, and thank you for sharing thoughts. For audience, this was one of the first interaction which Rahul has done on such a live basis, and it was very encouraging, Rahul. Thank you, Rahul.
soul.